because now we want to spend a few minutes to honor the memory of one of the most significant partners in the Arctic Circle journey. Scott Miner died suddenly in a matter of minutes, just a few weeks after he was here on this stage last year to announce his ambitious vision of how he wanted to support a growing global engagement on the Arctic. Very rarely does one meet an individual who is at the same time at the forefront of the practical implementation of the economic and the business world, but is also a visionary. And when I first brought to Scott the idea of creating the Arctic Circle as a new democratic open platform for the discussion of all these issues, he immediately decided to support it. He was probably the most influential business leader to join the Arctic Circle from the very beginning. And he came to every assembly which his health allowed him to come to, and to most of our forums in other parts of the world, in Greenland, in Singapore, in Quebec, in Alaska, and in other parts of the world. And on this stage, in one of the early assemblies of the Arctic Circle, he describes his vision of an Arctic investment protocol. He put it strongly that we could not progress with these ambitious plans of Arctic investment without environmental guidelines, sustainability guidelines. He wanted to establish a protocol which every company, every entity, every government wanted to establish projects and infrastructure and companies in the Arctic had to adhere to. It was a novel idea at that time, in the early years of the Arctic Circle Assembly, to have the ambition and the vision to say to the entire investment and business opportunities, yes, indeed, you can arrive and become a part of the Arctic, but there are rules, there are ground rules, there are principles, there are protocols of environmental and sustainability emphasis of what we are doing. And he delivered. He used this platform, the Arctic Circle Assembly and the World Economic Forum in Davos, to bring together a coalition of influential partners and environmental organizations. And in the end, a few years later, at the World Economic Forum in Davos in January, following the Arctic Circle Assembly a few months before, the Arctic Investment Protocol was formally brought to the world and signed by a significant coalition of partners. It was an extraordinary gift to the Arctic community to demonstrate to all of us and the rest of the world that it is possible to combine our environmental concerns, our sustainability investments, with the vision of progress for the Arctic. But he didn't stop. He didn't stop. In order to strengthen the belief of the Arctic people in themselves and in their future, that this was not just an isolated part of the world with very few possibilities so far as the future was concerned, he started to collect with his colleagues the Arctic Investment Protocol, the Arctic Investment Inventory, following the Arctic Investment Protocol, The Arctic Investment Inventory was a list of responsible projects all over the Arctic that could be and should be perhaps executed for the benefit of the Arctic people and the world within a reasonably short time. And to the astonishment of all of us, after having presented this project, his task, also on this stage and at numerous Arctic Circle forums in different parts of the world, he brought this also to the world. And the final number, when it was all added up, these thousands of projects, the Arctic Investment Inventory was over $1 trillion. Over $1 trillion. It was a transformative message that the Arctic was not a tiny peripheral place where only small-scale things would happen. It was a task of over $1 trillion. And if you link the two, the Arctic Investment Protocol and the Arctic Investment Inventory, I doubt if there's any single individual who has, through this platform we created together 10 years ago, so single-handedly changed the framework of how we think about the future of the Arctic. That is what Scott did. He changed the framework of our thinking, and thereby he changed our future. And a year ago on this stage, he declared, "I'm not finished. I'm not finished. I'm going to go forward and establish a global platform, bringing in scientists, researchers, indigenous people, visionaries, idealists, and others, in a new dynamic gathering of people, some of it based in Iceland, some of it based in Washington, some of them based in Asia or elsewhere. It would be a truly global effort, and with his resources and his connections, we all knew he could do it. But fate didn't give him these years. Before the period of the last year was over, just a few days before Christmas, he left us, suddenly, shockingly left us, just over 60 years or so old. It's a great loss for all of us, for the Arctic, and I also say for the world. So we wanted to take this final moment here to thank him and to remember him and to demonstrate in that way that we don't forget those who do great things for the Arctic. And by the way, in the spirit of his openness and his sense of democracy and access, one of the last things he did in his final years was to openly hand over the Arctic Investment Inventory to the world through the Wilson Center in Washington. We had an event at that remarkable institutions named and dedicated to the legacy of President Wilson, who tried to lead America into the predecessor of the United Nations. And now it's housed in the Wilson Center, open to everybody, wherever they are in the world. Openness, vision, belief, delivering, doing. That was Scott Miner. But above all, he was our friend. And before we play for you short excerpts from his speeches, 2 or 3 he made on this stage. I am honored to invite one of his other friends, Hugh Short, to come up here and share with all of us some of his thoughts about God. And after we have played the video, I will ask all of you to stand for a short moment to remember Scott Miner.
I'll keep this brief, but I first met Scott in 2011 at the Arctic Imperative, which is a conference in Girdwood, Alaska. It's a precursor to the Arctic Circle. When I first met him, I'm generously 5'8". That's what my driver's license says. Scott was a big guy. He was 6'3" probably, all muscle. He was a very good bodybuilder, very intimidating guy. And I got invited to a dinner, and Scott had posed a question at the dinner. He posed the question, if you had to deploy $300 million into the Arctic, and if you had to get 20% returns, and would there be projects? I sat in that dinner. I didn't stand up, I didn't raise my hand, but I thought about it, and I had done that in my career previous to the question. And he inspired me to create PT Capital. That was really the light switch that started it. He was the first guy to invest into our company. He brought dozens of other investors with him, and he took a chance on a guy from a town of 4,000 people in western Alaska that, has been there for thousands of years, but pretty hard place to get to. So what did I learn from him initially? He was brilliant. He was a brilliant man. He could see around a corner when others couldn't. He could see the Arctic as an emerging market when others couldn't see that. If I fast forward 10 years, the other piece of it that I learned, which was this very intimidating big guy, is his kindness and his heart. His heart was as big as him, probably bigger. Last time I was with him was October 14th, 2022. We were at the Hofty House, which is the Reagan-Gorbachev building. And at that meeting, Scott was announcing a big effort. And he made a couple statements that I screenshot. So one of the statements he made at that, and I just found a great picture. I kind of remember that day very vividly. It was a day like today. It was sunny. It was cold. And he said, quote, "I want to help guide the economic development based on the people of the Arctic and ensure peace and prosperity." Peace and prosperity. I remember he said you can't have one without the other. You can't have peace in the Arctic without prosperity. And we're very emphatic about that. In addition to that, he made the statement, we cannot impose our business and culture and ideas on people in the Arctic. That you can't impose your business and your culture and your ideas on the people in the Arctic. So it's with that, and then my good friend Mead texted me something to say. He essentially said Scott Miner told him early on that his goal was to leave a legacy in the Arctic as an emerging market. Well, it's 10 years later since he asked me that question, 300 million. And we are at 300 million, and it wouldn't have been possible without him. And so, as President Grimson said, we did have big plans. We had big plans to continue and keep going. And we're going to do that. We're going to do it in honor of him. We're going to do it because of him. We're going to do it because it's the right thing to do. It'll be likely a little bit harder without him. Let's just say a lot harder. It's going to take all your help in this Arctic Circle to do it. But in honor of Scott, let's get to work.
This reminds me a little bit of the Grateful Dead song that said, "What a long, strange trip this has been." President Grimson and I met about 11 years ago or so, and began this journey together. You know, I realized that the work I've done is largely in the area of economic development. And prosperity depends upon responsible economic development. But I also realize that it takes more than economic development to have prosperity. It takes peace. Because you cannot have true prosperity without security and peace. And so, you know, with the melting sea ice of the Arctic, the rapid changes in geopolitics today, the Arctic Ocean will become a sea of blue water, which will be threatened by the interest of the great powers of the earth. Because who will make sure that the policies that are established for the security of the Arctic are determined by the people of the Arctic? And so my vision is twofold. One is to help guide economic development in a responsible way based upon the will of the peoples of the Arctic, and to help secure the peace of the Arctic, which is necessary to have true prosperity. When I look at the Arctic, when I look at the business opportunities of the Arctic, I see an opportunity for investors like me to do well by doing good, by taking and leading the world to a responsible development of the Arctic, by getting the investment in place today for the infrastructure which will allow us to safely navigate the future, to protect the environment, and to advance the causes and rights of the indigenous nations. I think that working in the coming years on a sort of a master plan or a roadmap for the Arctic by the Arctic peoples, in addition to working to develop the institutions which will be necessary to finance this, both public and private or together, is probably the leading challenge that people like me have today. Let us not let the objective of reaching perfection stand in the way of obtaining the excellent. For it is time for us to move, and we must move quickly. By the faithfulness and grace of the Almighty, we cannot fail, and by His provision, we must rely to succeed. And so we shall walk together in this endeavor and join hands and hope that we may look back in history and we will say that this was a pivotal moment and that it was at this time that mankind stood up and took responsibility and created a new future for the Arctic.
What a visionary. What a force. It's a great loss for all of us. So can I ask you to please rise and for 30 seconds or so think about the message he delivered now from this screen. In this same hall, you saw that from the pictures. Think about how we can together honor his memory for making sure that that will be our journey indeed. Thank you.